Hi guys, here is a quick tutorial on sharpening select areas in your image. So many of you may be familiar with the portrait mode on certain smartphones that has a selective focus, and most of you should be familiar with creating a shallow depth of field in your portrait photos or your macro photos by using a low f-stop number on a certain plane of the image. But if you don't have that option on cameras available to you during home learning, here is a way that you can edit your photos to give you a selective focus or to sharpen certain areas or blur certain areas in a photo. So in Photoshop, we will see a similar option to the blur tool that we see in Pixlr. The blur tool also has the options up top of sharpen or smudge. I don't really recommend smudge too much because it tends to blend pixels together and make it look like your colors get a little bit muddy. But I would recommend trying sharpen or blur. Now, the way to do that without destructively editing your original image is to, of course, make a duplicate of your layer. So go to your layers panel, click the three dots to the left, and choose the option at the bottom that says duplicate layer. So I'm going to rename this layer to blur. And why might I want to blur parts of an image? Well, maybe it's distracting, or maybe I want to focus more on my foreground subject matter, which I've kind of already done in this photo of a leaf where I was focusing on that water droplet there. But if I go to this layer and I start to blur with a really soft brush and a fairly large size, I can blur the area of the background out even further to create an even more shallow depth of field in this image. So I'm doing this fairly quickly to demonstrate, but if you don't have this option on a smartphone, here's something that you can do to imitate that image in post. So I'll turn that on and off. It's very subtle, and I'm going to demonstrate it again with this second image here, which is also fairly close up. So I'm going to blur out the wood background behind. So I'm going to click on the three dots and duplicate this layer and rename it, just so I don't forget, blur background. Then I'm going to go to my strength, and this time I'm going to increase my strength a little bit more to 80%, and I'm going to start to blur the wood grain in the background behind this Brussels sprout, and hopefully draw a little bit more focus for the viewer to the actual vegetable itself, which is what I was photographing. So again, if you don't have a DSLR at home or your smartphone doesn't have a selective focus function and you're having trouble trying to replicate that shallow depth of field in your photos at home during our quarantine online learning, then this is a way that you can replicate that in post-production. So I've selected with that brush, blurring out the background. Let's see, I'd have a look at what that looks like. Turn it off and on again. Very subtle. And if I had a photo that was more noticeable, you might notice it more. So let's try with one more. Open image. Let's find an image that has a little bit more long depth of field here. Okay, there was a cardinal in the backyard. Okay, so this cardinal, not a great photo, but all of these tree branches are still in focus. So now we can see this effect a little bit better. So I'm going to right click where those three dots are, duplicate layer, and I'm going to increase my brush size a little bit. And I'm going to start to blur out these branches so that the focus can be directed to the bird. Now you can really see it a lot more visibly when that background was already in focus. So probably should have done that from the get-go, but that's okay. So blurring out that background so that the viewer can focus just on the cardinal in the frame. Now, if I turn that layer on and off with that check mark, you can really see the difference. Okay, second thing in this tutorial is the sharpen feature. So we're going to come back to this leaf here. I was focusing primarily on this water droplet. So if I go back to my background layer and duplicate, and I right click and rename this one sharpen, I'm going to try to sharpen the edge of the leaf and the water droplet even further. So I'm going to go on the top of my menu here with that little teardrop selected in my toolbar, and I'm going to change it to sharpen. And this time I'm going to keep my softness strong. And the reason for that is if I have my softness way down to 0%, then you're going to really see the edge of your brush as you sharpen. So I'm just going to increase my step a little bit here and decrease my size a little bit. And I'm going to zoom in to this leaf. Okay, and going back to my sharpen tool, check that everything's where I want it to be. Now I'm going to paint with my brush along the edge of that leaf. And the more I paint with this sharpen brush, the more you're going to see these little details arise. It's a little bit tricky if you were already out of focus. You see in the top left of this leaf, it's not out in focus at all. But as I paint around that teardrop, we can start to see these little edges become much more sharp and crisp. And we can even see details like the veins and the different colors in the leaf become more apparent. Now, if I turn that layer on and off, subtle difference, but you can really see, turn that layer off. Now we can see it a lot better. So my blur layer is actually on top of my sharpen layer, so that was my bad. We always want to think top-down approach. Remember, the layer on the top is always going to apply first and foremost. So if I turn this layer off and on again now, you can really see we're enhancing those colors and we're making that teardrop or raindrop on that leaf really, really stand out, and the edge of that leaf really stand out. So that is how you can use the sharpen and blur tools in Pixlr to kind of reproduce a shallow depth of field effect and to bring more focus to certain areas of your pictures. I hope this tutorial helped you out and that you guys are enjoying your time taking photos at home.